All right, good evening. We're back at our rest stop. I'm David Pereira. Who do we have here?
I'm David Harley.
He's David Harley. I'm Randy Thomas.
Very good.
And David
All
Beard.
right.
At least on my screen, that's the way everybody.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't relate to everybody. Well, we are here regardless of where we are on the screen. We are looking again tonight at being on a journey where we're taking a little break. This rest stop is a little bit more of a unplanned one, kind of thinking of us being on a journey where somehow we got stuck. I suppose everybody's been on that, where you had to make an unexpected, unwanted stop. I've been in a driving along in a van and had a breakdown, and that left me, scrambling for how to get things fixed. You guys have probably all had times where you've been stuck with a storm or car problems, I assume.
Both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not usually too pleasant. What do you find happening inside of you when you're stuck?
Okay, so this afternoon I was thinking of, sharing a time when I was stuck. And a number of years ago, we were down at the state track meet, and the great thing about it was we were able to use the new minibus that the school had purchased specifically for teams and activities. And so we were taking it, and I was driving it. And typically what we do the first night, since we're not competing until later the next day, we take the kids to a mall, and they can either shop, or we let some of them, they want to go see a movie. And, we spend 3 or 4 hours just to have them just kind of relax and enjoy themselves. Well, about 11:30, they all come out, and they've been watching a movie. We all get in the bus, and we get ready to head back to the hotel. Well, it won't start. Well, it can't be dead. It's new. We just got it. We keep trying to start it. We try different things. Finally, we decide, well, we better flag somebody down and jump it. So one of my assistant coaches does that. The guy comes over. Jumping doesn't help. Security comes out. You guys need to leave. We're stuck. We're starting to panic. To make a long story short, one of the athletes in the back, one of our girls, says, "Does this little button back here mean anything?" And we said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, it's locked. It's shut or closed." Well, come to find out, we didn't know, but when you are going down the road, or when you're parked, if this little lock is placed and put in place, it just kills the vehicle. Well, you don't ever drive with it or locked, because then kids can't get out if there's an emergency or something. So someone had mistakenly bumped it and had locked us down, so we couldn't start the bus up.
Yeah.
And it took us about 2.5 hours before this girl noticed that. And we got back to the hotel a little after midnight, and it's not the way we intended. So that was being stuck with 12 kids and a few coaches that we hadn't intended.
Wow. So some panic and frustration, I hear.
Yeah.
Wondering how you're going to get these kids back to their rooms.
Yeah. It's one thing to be stuck by yourself, but to be stuck in response, in taking responsibility for some others, it's not fun.
Yeah.
So we have this sense I'm wanting to be heading somewhere, but I'm not getting there. Okay. When you get stuck in a car, I mean, you think of even, being, in a storm kind of situation, the vehicle that's supposed to be getting you somewhere actually becomes more of a cage. It's keeping you, and I'm wondering how many of us are feeling kind of caged up, feeling not at home, not at our destination, which is really frustrating. We find it agonizing, and I wanted to look at a passage that brings that out. If you could turn over to 2 Corinthians 4 there, Randy, and maybe just read the end of that chapter, like verses 16 through 18, and then I'll pick up and we'll just kind of look at that and another passage right afterward.
Sure. Verse 16, that is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things that we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever.
And this is coming out of a time of real trouble for Paul. It wasn't an external difficulty, wasn't a transportation problem or an economic problem. It was really more personal pain, but it was intense. And he was suffering and hurting, just lamenting his ministry, really, and kind of the reception they've been having. So he starts it with saying, we don't lose heart, although he was close to it, is the reality. He contrasts it then in chapter 5, it really just goes on. Let me just pick up there. Now we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile, we groan, longing to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling, because when we are clothed, we will not be found naked. For while we are in this tent, that is in our own bodies, we groan and are burdened, because we do not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now it is God who has made us for this very purpose and has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. Therefore, we're always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we're away from the Lord. We live by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So we make it our goal to please him, whether we are at home in the body or away from it. He goes to this metaphor of a dwelling place. Speaks of this body that we're in now as a tent. And in a sense, we don't want to be here. In a sense, we want to be somewhere else. Anything in this passage that kind of jumps out at you or surprises you at first?
Well, one of the things that I've never really picked up on in this passage as clearly as I did, maybe having the time to think about it and process a little bit, but the contrast that Paul writes about here, I mean, I'll just read some contrasts that stuck out at me. Like in verse 17, he talks about momentary versus eternal, momentary troubles versus eternal glory. Then he goes on down to down below in verse 18, he compares again temporary, for what is seen as temporary, what is unseen is eternal. So there's this giant dichotomy between these two, extremes almost. And then as I read it again later on this afternoon for a second time, the idea of the earthly tent being contrasted to an eternal house in heaven. So you've got earth, heaven being contrasted, and you've got a tent, which is a temporary dwelling for most people, and an eternal house, which is forever. I mean, that's a lot of tension there between the temporary and the eternal, the earthly and the heavenly, that he's writing about. I mean, that's a real struggle. Yeah. Anything for you, Randy?
Yeah, just building on what David said. I think that struggle is because he sets it up well. To me, the phrase that struck out was, we see the invisible. We don't focus on what we see. What we see is all the things that you just described, the earthly tents and the temporariness of this, but instead we really focus in on the unseen things. And so that's why he says we live by faith and not by sight.
We live by faith. because
Yeah.
we're fixing our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen.
Yeah.
What is seen is temporal, but what is unseen is eternal. And that is completely opposite from what we expect.
It's not how we live.
It's not how we live. Yeah. Why is that? Go ahead.
Well, we live in a world that we see and we interact with on a regular basis, and that's what's making this whole situation such a challenge, is because we're not able to interact with others. We're not able to interact with the things we normally do, and it's hard to grasp that and the idea that it being temporary, that this is going to pass at some point, is really hard to get a hold of, because you
Yeah.
don't know how long.
And our circumstances seem very real to us.
Yeah.
And yet Paul's saying the real substance is what is unseen. And we're like, we're such a visually oriented culture. If we don't see it, we don't believe it. That's our tendency. I've got to see everything.
We don't even have to live in Missouri to feel that.
That's right. Yeah, the condition has spread. Yeah. So that's how we live, and yet we're now in a situation where what seems real to us is unmanageable and uncomfortable, and we're left with, is there something else? Because Paul's saying we're wasting away on the outside, but on the inside, we're being renewed. It's not because of anything around us here.
Yeah. And I have to admit, when I read this, I can't help but think that one of the reasons Paul wrote it was because he's telling himself the same thing.
Oh.
He's reminding himself, this is where I have to think about this. I'm going to focus in on what is unseen. This is my task right now. And so writing it, it was true for him, but I also think it's self-propelling, because we each have a choice. What do we choose to focus on?
Oh. Yeah, that's interesting, because he does say we despaired even of life itself.
Yeah.
I mean,
this is a struggle for him, just like it is for us.
Yeah, it was a huge struggle. He goes, I mean, we're not knocked out, but we're definitely knocked down. You know,
Right.
It is rough. So we find Paul here seeking to minister a message of hope from heaven in a world that's hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are now really struggling with the same thing. We're hurting, we're uncomfortable, we're around people that are fearful, mad, whatever. And how do we offer hope? How is there something more than what is seen and felt? That's the challenge.
Yeah, offer hope. Yeah, offer hope, something that is unseen.
Right.
I mean, how do you offer hope to somebody that's something they can't see?
Right. And especially when we're sort of tend to demand that. If I don't see it, I don't believe it. But I remember you, Dave, as we were ministering to some guys in the jail, you recounted a passage out of Revelation that meant a lot to you. So why don't you read those verses to us, if you would? Revelation 21 there. And
Sure.
And then tell us what impacts you there, because you wanted to share that with some guys who were stuck. They were stuck behind bars.
Some of them are still stuck.
Yeah, some of them are. Some of them are out, but some aren't. What read those verses to us, and then tell us what they meant to you.
Revelation 21 verses 1-5 say,
Yeah.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. Verse 4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.
Now, what hits you about that message?
Well, again, I mean, going back to what we were just talking about a little bit, in recent months, I've just been struck with just things in the world that just don't seem right. And this was long before the coronavirus and everything that's going on with us right now, which has just amplified those thoughts. Recently, I've heard of some very, saddening news from some people that have lost their lives or lost their jobs or that sort of thing. And it just makes you wonder if this is ever going to end, not just that, but suffering. And so this verse has just been present in my mind for a long time. And initially, I always, when I was a kid, I always had a hard time thinking and looking forward to heaven. Because I think as a kid, you get the idea in your mind that it's going to be just a bunch of people up there singing, and we're going to sing around this river flowing, and as a
long church service.
Yeah, you're thinking, that's really not what I've got in mind. And then as you get older, you grow a little bit and you start thinking a little differently, but still things in this world are just good enough and just pleasant enough for most of the time for us that we still don't look and anticipate toward heaven as much. There's a beautiful sunrise. There's a nice day at the beach. The grandchildren make you smile. You enjoy a good meal. You enjoy good friends. So you still don't look. But soon as I think you start to get older and you get closer to that day, closer to the mortality that you're facing, and like we just read about in 2 Corinthians, this idea of the unseen being eternal, and you start to realize that that's real. You take a different perspective and you start to long for it. And I've struggled recently with that longing and still trying to think, is that a good thing to long to be away from this world? Because there's still work to be done here. There's still things to be done. And I think I lean more and more to the conclusion that, it's okay to long for that. I mean, when you have the idea that God himself is going to come and wipe away my tears personally. He's not going to just blink or snap his fingers and all the tears are gone. He's going to personally wipe the tears out of my eyes. That's something that you get excited about and to look forward to. And to know that there'll be no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, no more isolation, no more fear. I mean, it's that passage is just, like I said, it's been weighing on my mind in recent months, and in recent weeks with everything going on in the world, it's become even more important. And I just wanted to share that with the guys that, like you said, are pretty hopeless at times and in a very tough spot. I know they're probably thinking about the coronavirus as well, but more importantly on their mind is, when am I going to get out of here? When can I get, quote unquote, back to normal with my life?
Right. And it really, everything that we don't like in our lives has the potential to really focus us on what really is lasting. I mean, Randy, when you think about our current lack of comfort, how does that affect your longing for our real home?
Well, of course, it only makes it intensify. It's interesting. Sunday night, I had a bout with food poisoning. And so here I am, not feeling good, and suddenly making frequent visits to the restroom, and I'm up all night, and I'm thinking to myself, oh no, is this food poisoning or is this the virus? And you go through that mental dialogue while you're laying there on the bed and wondering what's going on. And there were times in which I thought, boy, if I've got this virus, just take me quickly so that no one else is going to get it, and I'm feeling miserable enough right now that this would be a good passage to have come to fruition right now. This passage and this concept of getting away from this world and from its pain and its struggles, it's actually pretty exciting to me. And especially if you look at some of the phrases that are in this passage, the one that jumps out of the pages to me it's that covenant formula that he gave to Abraham You will be my people and I will be your God. It's like everything that God has promised comes to fruition in this particular moment. That personal relationship that he always has wanted with us, not that we've always wanted it with him, but that he's always wanted it with us, is actually going to be something that we will be able to enjoy and taste and know. And that's just mind blowing. It's kind of like what you said, David, about him wiping every tear. It's beyond our wildest imagination to think that this God that he's invisible, we don't see him, but we will see him. He'll touch us. He'll wipe away every tear. It's just beyond imagination.
We'll finally be home.
Yeah.
He will be their God. We will be his people. But more importantly, what you're saying and what I'm saying is, he will be my God.
Yeah.
And I will be his.
Yes.
And that individual picture that I think I see in that is just, I see the covenantal picture, with the redeemed and all that, but I also see that individual component. And that's a far better picture for me of heaven than, as a kid looking out and thinking I'm going to be laying in this nice pasture land singing songs, with harps,
Yeah, it's really going to be the home that we've longed for. And that's where all of these difficulties really are a blessing, not because we enjoy them or like them, but because they heighten our hunger and desire to be home, intensify even that vacuum in our hearts where we know we're just not home. We're not where we were meant to be.
And in the meantime, we live in this period of ambiguity, the not knowing, the not being in control, the not having things go our way. And in the process of that, we learn to trust.
Yeah.
We learn to trust that God is faithful and that he is good.
When we think about eternal destinations, I remember Corrie ten Boom, which a lot of people, I think, were deeply impacted. I know I was by her life. But at one point, she tells the story of being at a train station and the clerk is checking her in and going over her itinerary. And his question is, and what's your final destination? And she said immediately, heaven. No, where are you going? My final destination is heaven. Doesn't matter where I'm going.
Yeah.
My final destination is heaven. That's where I'm headed. That's where we're going to be. And that's what our hearts long for. Well, thanks for the time tonight, guys. I'm glad we could present a hope that hopefully touches others and certainly encourages our hearts as well.
Absolutely.
Good night.
You want to lead us in a prayer, David?
Sure. Father God, our hearts are stirred by the promise of something bigger than what we're in. We're so overwhelmed by our circumstances at times, our futility and our uncertainty. And yet the promise we have from you is that ultimately we're going to be with you and we're going to be able to rest in your complete comfort and acceptance. So may that be what just envelops our hearts and minds and touches people that are hurting right now. Want to entrust each of them to you. Thank you for tonight.